Welcome to Checks and Balances. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And this week we've got Alex Vincent Martelli from Martelli Co Buyer's Agents to tell us everything you need to know about being a buyer's agent.
So in New Zealand, buyer's agents are not spoken about much at all. So that's what today is all about. But Alex, before we do that, welcome. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit of background?
Sure. So to put it in context, a buyer's agent is someone who is a professional who comes in and helps a buyer through the journey of buying a property. They're retained by the buyer, and I'll go into why that's significantly different to a real estate agent, so I've given you some help on the side. But really what I do is I come in and I help people who say, I need some assistance with the search, or I want to hand this over to a professional. Yeah. Sometimes had quite a bad experience previously, or just say, look, this is something I'm outsourcing from the start. And then I understand their brief. I challenge that brief and make sure that what they want to buy is achievable. And then I go out and scour the market. So I look for everything that's pre-market, everything that's coming to market, everything that's sitting quietly off market, everything that's on the market. And I basically go out, review those properties, understand the pros and cons of each. I reduce it down to the number that I think is appropriate for the buyer. And then I arrange private viewings for that buyer to go and see those homes if it's suitable. And then we basically, and this is really the strength, is that the more homes you have available, the more you can kind of leverage those homes against each other. So if we were to look at it the other way, it's basically turn the tables, where instead of having one property and multiple buyers, which is what a sales agent aims to do, I have one buyer and then aim to have multiple properties. So I've come back to New Zealand. I've been away for a number of years and decided to set this up because I could really see a gap in the market here. And I've always worked in real estate, been a buying agent overseas, which was a great experience. And then in other markets, it's way more developed as well. Like up in the UK, there's a lot of different buyer's agents, especially in your super prime area. So I worked with a lot of super prime buying agents up there. And then even at your entry level as well, there's much more balanced representation on each side.
Yeah. I know, Mike, your favorite show is Lux Listing Sydney. Is that pretty much just the life that you live?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Will I take the McLaren or the Porsche?
Yeah. And let's do like 30 different cuts as I drive to the house. With the same song every time.
It looks pretty cushy, doesn't it? It's nice.
Yeah.
So I actually learnt the ropes of what I do from Simon Cohen. We used to work together, and he's built up a really impressive business. I don't deal so much with the Porsches and the Maseratis and that side. And I think that is what makes property seem very, very exciting. However, we already know, and the people that you guys deal with as well, for most people, that's not actually a reality of life.
Or they'll finance it and they can't get the mortgage.
Or it's their reality and then it's like, oops, it's off a cliff.
Yeah, and sometimes you do have to, I think it's really important to anyone who's buying property, don't let your mortgage keep you up at night. If you're
we're doing it wrong, mate.
Make sure that you're actually comfortable with the amount that you're taking, because there are other priorities that are going to come up in life. So you have to be really realistic of what you're looking at.
When you say not keeping you up at night, if I'm staring at the ceiling, is that okay? No,
that's okay. It's funny because I actually say that to a lot of my first time buyers. I'm like, I can get this to work on paper. Like I can get this to work at the bank. I can get you the money. Can you afford this? Like you've got to be comfortable.
I thought I heard you say, if you don't need a snorkel to deal with this level of debt, you're not trying hard enough. I thought that's what you were doing. So Alex, I mean, you've explained a little bit already, but what problem does a buying agent solve?
So essentially at the moment, if we looked at the average property journey, you take a buyer, let's say they're an independent or a couple, and they'll go through this process where they're looking on Trade Me, they're looking on realestate.co.nz, they see the home, perfect home, beautiful, it's got all the features we want. They go to the first open home and they're there with like 30 other buyers, and already you've got that pressure, like maybe these people have got, better snorkel than I do. They're going to be able to buy spend more money. So what happens, most people I deal with are busy. And it's one thing I used to say when I first went into this job many years ago, people are time poor. Everyone is time poor. I don't know anyone who isn't time poor at the moment. So really it's about people who say, there's a better use for my time. Higher and better use. So essentially those people will then be working through the week. They're really busy. They might be able to keep up with the due diligence. So then they go along to the second week and they've taken their mom or their dad or their friends or whoever along. And so you've got another week. And meanwhile, other people are busy doing their due diligence on their property. Now, when in the heat of the market, everything was going to auction. So you were being dragged through that 4-week period where suddenly there's a big group of people and one eventual buyer. Which means there's just a lot of people who leave that auction room sad. What you now have is, because a lot of people are buying property at a negotiated price or by tender, now it's a question mark. It's, well, what is the property worth? And that scares a lot of buyers. One thing I noticed when I came back to New Zealand, quite unique to when I was in property in the UK and Asia and Australia, is that real estate agents, someone will go through the property and real estate agents go, what do you think it's worth? I'm like, what? How's anyone supposed to know that? My friend's trying to buy a property at the moment. She's a nurse. She works for the Starship Hospital. She's literally involved in saving children's lives day in, day out. And she gets asked, well, what's the home worth? I don't know. So for a lot of people, that process is going through, looking at a home, getting to the point of the auction, doing all the due diligence, spending a lot of money. And I don't just mean like the cost of your time, the cost of lawyers reviewing the contract, building inspections. You can easily drop $600, $700, $800 on that. The cost of going out to the property. And if you miss out for whatever reason, that's a sunk cost. You don't get any of that back. So when you ask what gap does a buyer's agent fulfill, they take all of that due diligence and they basically pull it forward, because all I do day in, day out is I'm speaking to real estate agents. All I do is hound real estate agents. And I speak to them about, what properties are coming up to market, what can I see ahead of market, and go out and do all that due diligence period, speak to the Auckland Council, what's happening on the development site next door, what's happening in the community, what infrastructure is coming in place. And hence why I never go through a point of seeing a property on the market and then waiting out that 4 weeks. That's just not really, for me, adding a lot of value. It's trying to find as many properties as possible and then really saying, okay, here's where the value sits. And I think people at the moment are struggling to see or understand what a property value is. And
I think specifically in the market at the moment, there's quite a big mismatch between the vendor's expectation and what people are willing to pay. And it's you're seeing everyone's thinking, it's 2021 prices. No, it's still worth this. It's still worth this. I'm like, mate, the market has shifted.
And it's hard because different properties, like there are some properties that are still worth CV, and it depends on what the demographic is. Like at the moment, we're seeing a lot of young families coming in, and because the thing about the market, life goes on. People are still having children. People still want to get out of the big house with the swimming pool. So you find that people still need to buy properties. People still need to sell properties. But yes, vendor expectations on some properties are just way too high, and others, you're actually sitting pretty close.
So in August, just side note, August 2023, Mike and I we're trying to talk our way out of a recession. Is how we're playing this game. And there are some somewhat promising signs with
mate. We're on the way up.
Where inflation is, and both locally and overseas, and what the stock market, particularly in the US, has done this year. How are you feeling about the market at the moment and where it is?
It's an interesting question because obviously we're in an election year, and that tends to, I think the psyche of it is actually more serious than the election itself. And that people have this idea of, well, we're going to wait and see what happens with the election. And I always say to people, well, how's it going to impact what you're going to do? You're still going to buy or sell a home. As I say, life has to keep moving forward. It's interesting how we like to refer to buyers markets and sellers markets. In my view, there's pros and cons to each. As a buyer, if you're going out right now, if you can afford your mortgage and the interest rates, which obviously are a bit higher, then yes, you can get some steals, but it depends on what the property is. There are some distressed sales out there, but there's a lot of sales that aren't distressed as well. There's just people selling their home. So there is a good opportunity to buy a home here, but I really think you have to do a lot of due diligence on the homes to understand why is the home being sold? Is there anything I've missed? In a hot market, yes, you're paying a bit more, but there's more properties to choose from. There's so little on the market at the moment. And that's why from a buying agent perspective, I have to be finding all of those homes, dealing with, sometimes I do get calls from vendors direct, and I have a chat to them about, if they want to sell, and that comes with its own complexities. So the market, yes, it's challenging at the moment, but I would say to anyone who's looking to buy, there will be more homes that come to market, and that market will pick up again. The cycle will move forward again. But if you're looking to buy at the moment, you can get some really great buys.
It's funny. I think Bravi was bidding on a house last week. He thought it'd go for $850, and it went for over $1 million.
He was destroyed. Take that, Bravi. No. Sorry, it didn't work out. So you mentioned about the time poor aspect to it. which I mean, your boy loves to delegate. Who are the kind of people that you work with?
Yeah. It's an interesting one. You talked about Lux listings. There's this perception that people who would use a buying agent are like the super rich.
The mega wealthy,
yeah. And I remember when I came back to New Zealand, people were like, oh, we don't have that many people at $30, $40 million. I was like, I don't know 30, 40 million.
Although if you've got them, you'll take them.
So really, I tend to find that the people who want to use a buying agent, as I say, they might have been burnt before, might have had a bad experience. They say from the outset, this is not my strength.
Yeah.
The first property that I ever looked to buy was actually to help a friend, and this is where I first kind of got the idea of, do I set up a buyer's agency here? He's a super cool fintech guy, really smart, but said from the outset, like, I don't buy real estate, something like that. And he said, can you come and have a look at this property for me? I said, sure, I can. And he goes, look, the agent said that the guy paid 2.7 for it. He spent 150K in renovations. And the agent thinks I might actually be able to get it for between 2.7 and 2.8. So this guy's going to take a loss. I was like, okay. So you go and look for the property. And I spoke to the agent and I said, well, this is by private appointment. Have you run a campaign before? She goes, oh, yes, this is the end of the campaign. I said, well, how many campaigns have you run before this? She goes, well, 2 before this. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So we're starting to get a bit of a feel for where things are.
Yeah.
And credit to my friend, that's just not the sort of thing he's ever going to ask about. So I said, well, can I have a look at the list of the renovations? Because some of the renovations, I mean, there's renovations and there's renovations, and we've all seen the not so nice ones. And she went through the detail and I was like, look, a lot of this we're actually going to have to pull up. It's not at a specification that it should be. So we start to deduct. And so then you start to put the pressure on. In the meantime, he and I were looking at a few other properties. And again, that's that leveraging point. You can say, yeah, I understand that you want to sell this home, but I'm looking at 3 or 4 others. Anyway, we negotiated down, and we ended up securing it around 2.3. And I think it was just a reminder that for him, he just wanted someone who could come in and give him an expert opinion when this isn't his forte. Yeah. So people who say, I'm not interested in doing the property search, people who've been burnt a few times, and people who see that it's not an efficient use of their time. So a lot of my clients are people who are working executives, both working, both earning reasonable salaries, have the deposit, and you've seen this before, Michael, where you're having to renew people's finance. They've got the money, but they haven't got the time. Yeah. So I try to go through and speak to people who are busy working and say, well, how am I going to communicate with you? What's the best way to do your search? I get referred quite a few people who are coming out of a marriage. And you might find that they've always bought homes together and now they're divorcing, unfortunately. So their assets have been halved, which means the capital available to buy a home is half. So then you've got to try and help them find a home that is going to be their new home and feel like a home. And that's where I tend to bring in a lot of other people. So I'll bring in interior designers to say, let's create something new and exciting.
Yeah, cool.
How do you think they, in the divorce part of the market, are they, it might be all over the shop, but do they kind of jump at the opportunity to be able to move on? Do some really struggle to actually make a commitment to essentially leave their old life?
Depends on how awful the marriage was, I think. I think most are pretty, I think by the time they've been through that divorce process, they've said, actually, I'm ready to move forward and I want to create my life. And that's where often I work with you guys, because you can say, particularly you can look at someone's assets and say, okay, well, we're going to invest so much money here, perhaps in stocks or whatever it's going to be, into a business. And Alex, you've got $2 million to go out and find Mrs. Smith a nice home. So it's kind of taking a more holistic view of what's that person's future looking like for the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's also a role that I try to fulfill is whenever I speak to a buyer, it's not let's find your home, but what is this going to mean for you in the next 10 years? Yeah. I try to say this especially to a lot of first-time buyers I work with. They kind of want everything in a home. It's
they do.
Yeah. And I'm trying to explain to them, this is your first step on a ladder. Yeah. So find a home that is, the one I always get is they're like, oh, we really want a very cool villa. I'm like, those entry-level villas.
But we don't have any money for renovation.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, what about a brick and tile? Yeah. I understand they're not as attractive, but if you are just getting your way onto that ladder, buy something sensible, buy something in a good location. I've got a search at the moment in a sort of Parnell Newmarket, classic one. She wanted a Greyland villa. I looked at her budget. I said, you know what, let's find you a really nice brick and tile in Newmarket, Parnell. And already was secured one, spoke to a group who deal with tenants because she's going to rent out some investment. And it's a really good location for finding people who are going to work at the hospital. So really, really good tenants, nice capital growth, and she can do a bit of a renovation and value add. So I think having honest conversations with your buyers is really, really important.
She wanted a villa as a rental property.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's that thing that people do want everything in one home, and you're never going to get it. And the other thing I've realized is that I remember I used to deal with the super prime in London, that we had a buyer come in, we had a property for 32 million, and she was like, oh, if only I had 35 million pounds. And it's like every buyer wants more. So at your entry level, the people who've got 800,000, like, oh, if only I had $1 million. It's across the board. You're always going to wish you had more money, and you're not. So you've got to find a balance.
Yeah, it makes me think about something you just said, Alex, about asking about the renovations that had been done at the work at that finance fintech person's house. Yeah. And Mike, it just makes me think that, I know you've been doing some wiring at your house recently, doing the electrical work.
He's been doing DIY.
This is the whole reason when people go like, why is men's life insurance more expensive than females? Mike is the reason. Anyway, I'm just thinking about you eventually selling your house. People are like, oh, let me look at like the renovation work, and it's electrical work, M. Vincent.
Yeah, look, I gave up on that. Turns out being an electrician actually requires some pretty specialist knowledge, and I don't have that specialist knowledge. Yeah, so I tapped out.
Yeah.
The thing I find quite wild though is actually one day you're just expected to know how to buy a house.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And like if we're looking at a buyer's agent and the problem it solves, and these types of things, I get so many of my customers come to me. And, I could spend a week talking to them about every little avenue of how to buy a house and the things that can go wrong and what you need to look out for. But you're just sort of, a young person spending a large amount of money, and then all of a sudden you're like, and what is due diligence? What is on them? What is? And there's jargon just coming at you left, right, and center. And it's like, it's very overwhelming for a lot of people.
It is. And I think we tend to forget that the agents here have a fiduciary responsibility to the vendors. Yeah. And it is very much a system that is set up to favor the vendors. And that's fine. But as you say, we have this expectation that people, like my friend who's a nurse, she's just going to know the property value. She's not going to. That's not her strength. And I think a lot of the rules here do apply more to assist vendors more. And I think a lot of buyers do feel very overwhelmed by the amount of information. And what you tend to get sometimes is... I used to reference this when I was living overseas, where I'd be working with a buyer and they're like, I've looked at 30 or 40 properties. And I said, yeah, but you're like the person who's now been into, the shop, and you've now tried too many perfumes and you don't actually know what you want anymore. And then they buy the wrong property. And I've actually met a few people who have admitted that, where they said, we just felt we need to buy something, anything. Yeah. And that's the worst thing you want to do. You don't want to be buying, and you don't want to be overly emotional in what you're buying. It has to have some logic and reason.
It's like Mike nearly buying the haunted house in Ponsonby.
That would have been fun.
Although great revenue 1 week a year, we must say.
Halloween. Yeah. It wasn't haunted. He did die in the bathroom, but it was.
Yeah. In terms of how a buyer's agent gets paid, do you get paid by the vendor? Do you get charged a flat fee, or do you get paid a percentage by the buyer? How does it work?
So it's a really important. It's a good question. It's an important one for understanding the difference between a vendor's agent helping you with your search and what a buying agent does. So I charge a retainer upfront, and most buying agents will. And what the retainer says is, you are a proper buyer. You're actually a qualified buyer, and you're ready to go. Yeah. The reason that's important is that if you're my buyer and you've paid me an amount as a retainer, and James is a sales agent, and James got a really good property coming up, he deals with people all the time who say that they're buyers, and then they sort of just change their mind. Man. And they change their mind, or they work with a different agent, or they decide, actually, I'm not going to buy a property. Being retained says I'm a qualified buyer, and what happens is that the real estate agents, as soon as you say you've got a retained buyer, they're like, okay, this is someone who I'm really going to prioritize, because it's going to help me to get a sale across the line. Sales agents and buyers agents, although we're polar opposite in what we want to achieve in terms of price, we're the same in that we want to get a transaction done. We want all parties to be happy, and we want to do a deal as efficiently as possible. So they've been put on paper to represent that property. I'm on paper representing a buyer, so actually it makes the system much more efficient. So I charge a retainer up front, and then I typically charge a success fee at the end once I've found a property. You can do it as a percentage. I've done it as a percentage before. I also do it as a flat fee. And if I was saying to anyone who was looking to get a buying agent, just really understand, has the buying agent understood your brief? Yeah. If you call them up and they're like, yeah, not a problem, here's some paperwork and the fee's 2%, they haven't really, there's a risk that they're not really going to represent you very well, because some buyers, your buyers at $1 million can be much more challenging than your buyer at 3 million. But then once you get up to 7-8 million, they can become challenging again. So, and that's just about availability of stock, how competitive the market is. So each fee I set according to how easy or difficult I think the search is going to be. And the goal always is to be able to save that fee off the purchase price. So I'm always trying to bring the price down. That's the whole point. So.
And the reason why I ask around how you charge your fee is I can certainly see the value in terms of the time spent, how big of a transaction is. And if you make a mistake with the transaction, how significant the consequences can be. But then on the flip side, I can also see in New Zealand with the DIY mentality and all of those components. Do Kiwis get what a buyer agent does and the value that it brings?
It's an interesting one. I had an agent, when I went out and spoke to different agents about it, because I have a very symbiotic relationship with the real estate agents. Most of them, especially the really high-performing agents, like totally get it, really understand it. In fact, they refer me quite a few buyers because they say, look, we would like to focus on listing and selling property. You deal with the buyers and then all the transactions are much more efficient and quicker. There were a couple of them who were like, oh, it's not the Kiwi DIY way. And I was like, well, I'm not sure we're still, other than this gentleman and his electrical work, don't buy his home. Most people actually say, I am going to outsource everything. I mean, you guys have a business that's based, people could go out and call every bank and find their own mortgage. They could do their own accounting, but they don't. They outsource things. So what I tend to find in common with my buyers, as I say, sort of highlighted before, is that they don't see this as the highest and best use of their time. And they see what the value of their time is. So for whatever my fee is, for the homes I'm going out and looking at, which is just day in, day out driving around. I spend a lot on petrol. Going out and looking at homes, speaking to agents. There's a property I was looking at the other day for a buyer, and obviously with the flooding issues in New Zealand, it's quite concerning. I spent 52 minutes on the phone to Tower Insurance. Now that's fine because I run my own business and I can be sending emails. For most people, they can't sit in their office. You can't be working for KPMG and also be on the phone.
Minutes,
So they're the ones that really understand it. So I find that people who see that the best use of their time is someone else doing the search, they're all over it. They're really onto it. And then you're always going to have that old school mentality.
What's the deal with off-market transactions?
I think it's one of those hype words. People get really excited by off-market. Must
sounds
be off-market.
special, right?
It does sound
love
special.
it when I say I've got an off-market. I was like, I've got this off-market thing. Everyone's like, ooh, tell me about it. I'm like, it just hasn't hit the market.
So there's a couple of things here. Something that's quietly available on the market, always understand why it's quietly available on the market. Now, I bought a property in Sydney once. The most beautiful site. It overlooked the water. Fabulous. The chap who owned it was a hoarder. He genuinely believed the world was coming to an end, and he had a bunker. So when you went into the bunker, it was like floor to ceiling with granola bottles. It was brilliant. So that was a classic sort of home where the agent said, we can't really take this to market. We need someone to come in
and
who can
do this thing.
Divorces, you'll get a situation where people are like, I don't want my nosy neighbors going through my home and looking at our photos, and fair enough. But I think always understand why the property is quietly on the market. Is there something that we need to be aware of? Any sensible vendor would probably say, I want to test the market and see why it's, what I'm going to get back. Interestingly, quite a few real estate agents are quite keen to do an off-market because, again, if I'm bringing a retained buyer, they understand the value of the property. I understand the value of the property, and we can do a sale. But what I'd say to anyone, because I used to be approached and they say, oh, can you just do an off-market search? I said, honestly, you're not getting the best value out of me. The best value you can get is where you're looking at again, leveraging those homes. We've got the on-markets, something that's about to come to market, and your quiet off-markets, and you're giving yourself more options. You're not being reliant on one property. So, off-market's great. Take them with a grain of salt.
Yeah. And what about, do vendors ever come to you directly and go find me a buyer?
Yeah, they do. And I find, I'm a big believer, and part of the reason I started this business is I truly believe that buyers should have representation. So in the same way, I think a vendor should have representation. And what I tend to say, I've bought from a vendor direct before, but vendors generally want the top price for their property. I want to pay the lowest possible price. So unless we're both being very realistic about values, it can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
But what I do is I always keep a database of those off-market properties and vendor properties. And then if we ever come to a point where there is a transaction, I'll usually say, like if I think we're just too far apart, I'll say, look, let's get a real estate agent involved. And I'll always recommend who I think is probably the best agent for them. And I have to make sure it's really important that they're given an option of agents to speak to. And they might charge a lower fee just to help have representation on both sides of that deal.
Yep. That's, because when they come directly to you, I guess it's a little bit of a gray area, isn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And when it comes to, I guess, the current market, is it easier for you in the current market that's a buyer's market versus seller's market?
Different strategy. So, and when you're dealing with a cooler market at the moment, it's really having to scour and find those properties, but it gives you a little bit more time to do your due diligence. So we were talking earlier about a home that I've seen. It went to auction. Now, I think that their price expectation is unrealistic. I've told my buyer, we're going to skip the auction. We're not going to do that. These people just need a little bit of time to kind of adjust and see what actually comes in. They had an unconditional buyer. They've chosen not to go yet. That's totally fine. So we're going to keep finding other properties. And we found a few others that we're starting to negotiate on. So they just need a little bit more time, and then we'll put an offer forward. And hopefully by then they feel a bit more comfortable with where the market's sitting. In a hot market, you're competing with a lot of buyers, and vendors, want to do a deal, but those vendors are dealing with more competition and homes available.
Yeah.
So I find that you have to speed everything up. You're trying to do your due diligence a lot faster. And that's when you put in some pretty long nights because you just have to pull everything together at once. And that's where I think having really good partners around you is very important. I remember when we first met, I was like, how quickly can you get finance approved if I've got a buyer? And you're like, I can turn it around that night.
Here's a bag of money.
Yeah, exactly. But that's really important to have someone like, last week I looked at a property. We really like it. The buyer's not sure about the bathroom. I was immediately onto an interior architect, designer. What can we do with this bathroom? How much it's going to cost? How soon can we get people in? Speed is very important regardless of which market, but having really good people involved is important. If I could also give people a tip, make sure you've got a really good lawyer. I find it's a bit of a New Zealand thing to be like, have you got a lawyer? And they're like, oh, my mum's friend's vet's lawyer.
I'm using the same one who my parents did their first house for. I'm like, why are they still practicing?
Exactly. So, and that's why I've sort of formed some pretty good relationships with the lawyers here who have that very good balance of being able to be pragmatic when they're looking at a contract and saying, here's a couple of things to look for, but you don't need to be so, don't worry about these points, and being able to give really good sound advice. So I say to any buyer, just make sure you've got really good people around you from wealth management, brokers, lawyers.
Yeah, and just a quick plug, there's heaps of really good episodes in the Checks and Balances catalog, one around due diligence on property. Remember when Sean McGiver from Hague Line spoke about the train tracks in the backyard? Crazy. Alex, before we wrap it up, any final tips?
Okay, a couple of things I would say to people, do your research, really understand what you're buying. When you're looking at a property, and this is why the comparable sales are so important, don't just go by the figures that you're given of local sales, because one street is completely different to another. And in the marketing photos, all homes look beautiful. I mean, the ability of a wide angle lens is quite incredible. But really understand, why has a property sold for $950 versus $1 million versus $1,050,000? So, and that doesn't matter actually which price point you're at. If those big homes, $7, $8, $9, $10 million, there's a reason why that one sold for $8 and that one sold for $9. So really do your research, do your due diligence, get good people around you. Speed is actually pretty important, being able to move quite quickly. I would also say to people, buy in a good location. Those, especially, it depends on what your risk profile is, but when we saw those prices rocketing over 2021 into 22, the suburbs that were sort of like the fun, up and coming growth suburbs, they're also the ones that are coming down. You're seeing a bit of a dip. And
not Pocono.
and that's quite scary for people who, paid top dollar in 21, and it's really painful to see it where now they're having to sell and they're taking a loss, and you feel bad for them, right? So I would always say, like, buy into a good suburb, even if their property's a bit average. Like, you can do a lot of work to a home. always obviously do your due diligence on the homes. We have such a mix of construction styles here in New Zealand. You try to explain to a foreigner what monolithic cladding is. They're like, oh, pardon? So I used untreated timber and plaster.
And then you just didn't worry about the water going in.
Exactly.
Leaky homes, who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, I deal with quite a few Europeans, and the style of home, like they're used to a price being advertised, and then like, they don't do auctions. They're used to a price being advertised, and then you go, okay, well, maybe I'll meet your price, maybe I won't. But they're not used to all the different construction methods we have here. And they're not used to our laws here either as well. So a lot of people I deal with are moving here particularly from Europe or the US, and this is a completely new experience for them. So do your due diligence, get good people in, buy into a good suburb, depending on what your risk profile is, as they say. And what I always say to people is, give me a call. If you ever just have a general question, you just need some help, give me a call. Give these guys a call. We've got plenty of expert years behind us in real estate, and generally try to help people because it is a daunting journey for a lot of people. And as you say, for most people, this is the biggest investment they're ever going to make. So why wouldn't you get as much help as possible?
Yeah. Call 0800 electrical for Mike's electrical handyman work. Alex, thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
You're lucky to be alive, man. I don't know what to say. Alex, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
If you're a person who likes to delegate and do not want to spend time in open homes forever, make sure to reach out to Alex. Please hit us with a sub. Make sure to review. Give us a like. We'll catch you next time.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.